Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A huge day for the championship. The three-way fight for the title is very much still alive. Oscar Piastri back on pole position for the first time in a very long time. Lando in the mix as well, but a terrible day for Max Verstappen, all things considered. Frustrated with his car from start to finish. Qualifies behind Yuki Tsunoda after seemingly floor damage following major drama during the qualifying session. It's only the sprint. They can make changes for the Grand Prix, but so far so good for the McLaren boys this weekend. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Plenty we've got to get into. First of all, starting here, we're going to get to FP1 in a second, but there was a lot of talk today, for good reason, about the plank wear that McLaren got double disqualified for back in Vegas. This was Lando Norris's car. Look, it's one screenshot, so it doesn't tell the whole picture. What I will say is the McLaren today looked absolutely fine. The Red Bull, on the other hand, was very close to the ground, and that was very interesting in terms of what we are going to see and discuss in the coming minutes. A few other updates as well, because McLaren said that the reason effectively why they pushed so hard with the FIA to try to see if they could effectively get away with it in Vegas, why the decision took some time, was because they weren't disqualified, or the plank wear wasn't caused by what it's usually caused by. Now, they were never going to get away with it. The rules are black and white. You have less than 9mm left of a plank, you are cooked, disqualified. It is what it is. But they tried because they didn't run the car too close to the ground. In fact, Zach Brown effectively said they did the opposite. They raised the car too high, and by raising it too high, they introduced porpoising, which they weren't expecting. Therefore, the car bounced. That's what did the damage to the floor rather than running it too low. So, I can understand why McLaren thought, well, hang on a second here. We've tried to be safe and not chase performance by putting the car here, but instead we've resulted in this consequence, which didn't gain us any performance, but, the rules are the rules. It's a complex sport at the end of the day. Max has had quite a lot to say over the last 24 hours. He also said this: if next year's regulations aren't very fun, he might just dip, right? He might get out of there, go and drive something else. He says winning 7 titles isn't on my mind. I can leave the sport tomorrow. But he did say that he certainly wants 5. People are saying, oh, McLaren are a bit scared of you. Max as well. I don't really care if they're scared of me. I just want the trophy to walk away with come Abu Dhabi. After today, that looks marginally less likely, but really the big points are on offer tomorrow in the main race. That is where Max and Oscar will really look to keep their title bid this season alive. There was also yesterday a driver meeting. So they sat down, the FIA, all the drivers, to discuss some of the controversial incidents in recent races, the Piastri versus Antonelli thing back in Brazil, for example. And exactly what they concluded is not especially clear. Brundle actually said on commentary that a couple of the people in this meeting walked out because they thought it was pointless. So that probably says enough what we need to say on that today. Now, Yuki Tsunoda, right? What a day for Red Bull and for Yuki Suzuki man in the comment section below, because, well, it looks like Yuki's career is over in F1. Because he made it clear yesterday, I know something that I cannot share obviously with you guys, but probably most people know it, so actually I have a similar understanding with you guys. I don't know what's going to happen, he says, but it was pretty clear based on his body language that Yuki is not going to be keeping that Red Bull seat for next season. It was also noted, well, Isaac Hadjar in an interview where he could not have made it any clearer that he is getting that drive next season, or at least is getting a drive, right? But yeah, his body language, his reaction, he said that he knows he'll be on the grid, so we know that for the very least. And Tsunoda, this was his body language, as it were, and says, look, I know something that you guys may not know yet officially, but is probably going to happen. And it feels like, yeah, Tsunoda is gone from the Red Bull seat. Hadjar's going to get the promotion. Lindblad is going to come into the Racing Bulls team. And it's kind of between Tsunoda and Lawson. But then Crofty in commentary basically hinted Lawson's getting the drive. So it looks like the decision has been made after several difficult weekends. Helmut Marko after Vegas basically said, look, sorry, Yuki, we did screw you over a bit. But look, at the end of the day, I like Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's a solid driver. But he has been in F1 for like 5 years. And has he shown anything during that time that was especially stunning? He's had the odd good performance here and there. It's pretty rare. Maybe early 2024 or something, he had like a really good stint when he put together a phase where he was very impressive. But outside of that, it's been relatively rare. So, look, for a driver who's been in F1 for a number of years, I can see it either way, whether he stays on the grid or whether he goes. It's unfortunate, I think, when you go to Red Bull as the second driver. This is probably inevitable to a certain extent, but it does look like Yuki is going to be gone for next season. Now, the remarkable thing about that is that today was the day that we properly found that out, and we haven't found it out officially yet. Hopefully Red Bull give him a proper send-off, which they did not do, as you remember, for Daniel Ricciardo last year. But on the day where that happens, Yuki has his best performance ever at Red Bull. So, yeah, it's maybe their decision is not fully made. I don't know, it probably is, let's be honest. But maybe they could still decide to change their mind over the next couple of rounds. They've not made anything official quite as of yet. Now, Adrian Newey, who will be Aston Martin's next team principal for 2026, he was there in the paddock today, messing around with the car, having a look at the team, and it feels like, well, we expected Qatar to be pretty good for Aston. Since some of their mid-season changes, they've just been better at high downforce tracks in general. Qatar is on the higher downforce side. Yeah, there's big straights, but also plenty of corners. You need a lot of load in that rear wing. That's where Aston Martin sit a little bit better. Newey was checking out the car with his green notebook more than we have seen before. Russell also made some points on the stewarding. I think this is kind of as a consequence of that meeting last night, saying somebody's got to stick their hand in their pocket to pay the stewards the correct amount to have consistent stewarding over 24 races. We've got a multi-billion-dollar sport. We shouldn't be having volunteers having such great powers. Look, totally agree with George on this one. I think pretty much everyone does agree, but someone's got to decide who pays for it, and that is, of course, always a bit of a challenge. The other spicy thing that Max Verstappen said was about the title fight. He's 24 points behind. That number will be different tomorrow. We'll see. Well, it actually might not be, depending on if maybe Norris and Max both crash out of the race or something. But the point is that if they had have been in the position, Max believes, to have had a car as good as the McLaren, this title would have been over a long time ago. So Max is, look, he is playing the games, right? And this is what we expected. The championship is not likely, but is possible, right? And Max knows that for sure. He was playing games in sprint qualifying today, and he's playing games to the press as well. He was asked, if you had the McLaren, what would it have been like if we are in this fight because of other people's failures? If we would have been in the position of how dominant of a car that they have had, the championship would have been over a long time ago, right? So, look, I don't think Max is necessarily wrong. I think that also Red Bull operationally would have done a better job with that McLaren machine than McLaren have been able to. Obviously, it's not how it works, but the point is, would McLaren have made the right type mistake, or would Red Bull have made the right type mistake? I am not so sure. Speaking of that, George Russell during practice was saying, I'm smelling a lot of wood. I don't think he was following the McLaren. But again, right, we see pictures of Lando's car sparking at the back. There's always going to be a bit of sparking. It is what it is. It didn't seem especially egregious today. And it's also worth keeping in mind that for the sprint race, it's only 19 laps. So you can get away with running the car a bit more aggressively because the plank wear rules stay the same. So you've still got to deal with the 1mm. But in the sprint, you're probably not going to get there because it's only a third of a distance. It was the same thing for Ferrari, right, back in China. Their cars were perfectly legal during the sprints, but in the main race, then they got disqualified. Bottas, for some reason, was on the track again. We've seen this a couple of times in the last couple of weekends. Thought that was a pretty funny radio message. Leclerc was really frustrated with the state of the power steering in the car. Few other notable things in qualifying. The other, I guess, thing was the sandbagging, really. McLaren looked pretty weak early on. Maybe they're running more fuel or whatever, but Norris was on the radio saying, damn, where can I find the 1.6 seconds to P1? But I think everyone knew that probably wasn't going to be how things were when qualifying got underway. And actually, even on those soft tyre runs, it was Piastri from Lando. Now, we've got to talk about Oscar Piastri and how that was going today during sprint qualifying, because Piastri has had a great time around this track. If there was ever going to be any track that Piastri would be able to come back strongly on, it was always going to be this weekend. It's treated him well in recent years. It suits his style very well. Very high grip, higher downforce circuits. Certainly better than some of the recent rounds have. Now, look, did I still think that Lando might have the measure of him marginally, but I thought the gap was always going to be smaller this weekend, and, well, that is certainly what we have seen so far. Pretty nip and tuck between the both of them during qualifying. In the end, the gap was still very small, but pretty controversial, as we'll get to in a second, what's happened right at the end of qualifying. But Piastri needs a huge weekend here, right? I mean, we talked yesterday that McLaren had a brief conversation as to whether Piastri should be sacrificed for Lando in the championship to hold off Max. That conversation was quickly ended because, look, Piastri's still in the fight. He would have been 30 points behind Lando after Las Vegas, but because they both got disqualified, you know, he's only 24 points behind. I mean, he's right in the mix, just like Max Verstappen is. Of course, he will still need to gain a boatload of points, and that's going to be a challenging thing to do, but he started off the best possible way this weekend. So it's felt for some time that we were in kind of like a two-team or two-driver fight with Max and Lando. Oscar dropping off the pace. And I'm not sure how Oscar will go in Abu Dhabi, really, but I think this weekend's, you know, he very much could win the sprint and the race tomorrow as well, and then the title will still be on, whatever happens with Max Verstappen. But will it be on for Max? So SQ1 gets underway, the medium tyres go on. We've also, of course, got to talk about what is happening at Ferrari, right? Like, what an absolute nightmare those boys are having, especially Hamilton right now, but Leclerc as well. I mean, there's just so much frustration. The car is clearly terrible. It's just interesting that going into this weekend, even for some time, a few rounds ago, we would have said, okay, obviously it's going to be Max's up there and the McLarens, but who else is going to be in the mix? Is it going to be Mercedes? Is it going to be Ferrari? The question is now, is it going to be Mercedes or like Aston Martin or Williams? Not even Ferrari. We're not even contemplating Ferrari being competitive, especially around a track like this. So, I mean, Hamilton was already just ahead of the Alpines, and those are the only cars he could beat at the end of the qualifying session. Yeah, I mean, his lap wasn't even that bad. That's the tragic thing. He made a couple of small mistakes and corrections, but the car just didn't have the pace. Like, that's the blunt honesty of it, that it's not like Hamilton made major errors. Of course, there's a confidence factor, right? The car probably could have, well, obviously in Leclerc's hands, did go marginally faster, but not much faster, all things considered. So qualifying ramps up, of course. Piastri goes P1, a tenth ahead of Norris this time. So already it felt like Piastri had just a little bit. It was very close between them, but Piastri in that middle final sector was just a little bit quicker than Lando. And, well, it's good to see the competition being back in force, I suppose, at the end of the season here. Probably always expected around this type of track. Alonso then went P1. Now, this is pretty mega, actually, to go green, green, green and go ahead by a tenth, or a hundredth, sorry. It was a great lap from Alonso and kept himself right in the mix all the way to SQ3, as we shall get into. But at the end of the qualifying session, this was Antonelli just about getting his lap in. So Mercedes were good today, but yeah, not Antonelli's best session with respect to George Russell, who really put it together when it mattered right at the end of qualifying. But Hamilton was out. 9 tenths off Max, down in 18th place. Leclerc was about 4 tenths further up the road. I mean, that was only good enough for 13th. I mean, look how tight it was. You had Hülkenberg in 4th. Hamilton was out in 18th again. Just another disaster, and he was asked for, you know, his positives, and he said, at least the weather is nice. So, yeah, it's been a tragic few weeks for Hamilton. I know that he just wants this season to be over, doesn't have to bother about this car anymore. I think that Charles Leclerc probably feels the same as well. But any ambition that Ferrari had to get second in the Constructors' Championship has long ago since melted. There was then a bit of drama with Max and Lando. So this is what happened here. This actually isn't the screenshot of where Max was. But effectively, Lando was starting a flying lap into turn 1. Max had just finished a flying lap. And on every other occasion, Max would just pull over to the right-hand side and let the guy through. But knowing it was Lando behind, Max decided to keep pushing through turn 1, was probably about a second ahead of Lando, roughly. So it wasn't within, and obviously Max knows this, it wasn't within impeding range where he's going to get a penalty, but absolutely when you're right on the limit of a qualifying lap, the dirty air that came off the back of Max's car ruined any chance that Lando had through that turn 1 of making it successful. So Max obviously knows what he was doing here. Lando knew what he was doing as well. Again, these are the type of games that Max is going to play. Maybe the other drivers need to play as well. But to get into the head of the drivers, that's what Max is trying to do. And he will be pulling out all the stops to try and win this title, even after what was a very challenging day today. But I think Lando mentally is absolutely stronger than he has been before. You know, he's able to at least bounce back from that type of incident and at least put together a solid qualifying. It wasn't great for Lando today, not on the front row, but, you know, it was still good enough, all things considered. Then, again, SQ2, Piastri and Norris separated by half a tenth. Then everyone else was about 3/10 back. And that was the thing, right? This was meant to be a big one for Max. It needs to be, let's be honest, and it still does. But Max's car was close to the ground, and I think probably more than any other car, leaving a trail along the floor. It felt like Red Bull knew that they could probably push the absolute limit of ride height here, given it's a sprint, and then they can change the setup after that for the main race if it is required. But it did cause some issues, because this is SQ2 coming to an end. Lando Norris has his own adventure here, actually. And again, the gravel, the floor, that can be an issue. Hadjar nearly made it through, then he got a lap time deleted. Kimi got through instead. Both Williams through to SQ3 as well was probably one of the big surprises. We had Fernando Alonso crashing out as well. He got impeded. Not really impeded, but again, Yuki effectively did to Alonso what Max did to Lando earlier. So Alonso wasn't very happy about it. And then he decides to hold up Yuki for the entire lap. So tried to get in his head a little bit. But Max was not happy about the bouncing of the car. His car was through the corners all over the place in terms of hitting the floor, and that's what affected his first lap in the final qualifying session. He has a big moment towards the end of the first sector, and we can see it right here. So this is Max ramming through the gravel and way off the racetrack after a huge moment, right? I mean, he was trying to take the speed, and if his car had stayed where it was, it would have been fine, but he bounced a little bit off the track. He lost a bit of the downforce and the grip from the tyres, and he was off the road. Nothing else he could do in that moment. And it did appear that he may well have picked up some damage as a result of this, actually. There was, you know, if you look a little bit further on, it does appear that that front element of the floor, I mean, that doesn't look symmetrical to me, and presumably it's meant to be symmetrical. So it looks like there was some damage on the front of Max's floor. And Max is on the radio saying, this car, man, like, I can't do anything about it. It's just bouncing like an idiot, he says. Then Piastri goes P1, Norris is P2 by half a tenth, right? So it was all nip and tuck between the two McLaren guys. Max is then on the radio giving his thoughts. The big drama, though, leading up to the final run was this. This was Lando's positioning. I felt like it was very questionable from McLaren where they put them. So Lando came out last, and, well, what was he going to do? Was he going to push hard? Where was he going to end up on track with respect to Alex Albon, who was just in front? Lando tried to get ahead of Albon, but then Albon took that position on the track back. So, unfortunately for Lando, the timing just wasn't great, and he crossed the line with about 4 seconds left, but he was probably a second and a half behind Albon, and around a track like this, that is going to absolutely ruin your aero performance, and probably the best of the tyres was seen in the first flying run anyway. To Max comes over the line, it's only good enough for 5th, he was at the time 3/10 off the pace, and Yuki comes over the line and goes ahead of Max. Now, this is quite the performance, really. Like, you say what you want about car setup and Max had the damage or whatever, but for Yuki to come in today and do a very impressive job shows that the Red Bull isn't a million miles away, but also it's a very interesting time for him to do it, given that we think he's just been sacked. But he outqualifies Max for the first time ever, at least in his career, and the other laps are still filing through. And then we looked down to the bottom of the timing screens and saw that it was George Russell had gone purple, but then Piastri took the purple middle sector away. He actually lost a bit of time in the first sector. He had a pretty big moment at turn 4, probably lost him a tenth and a half or so. So, you know, Piastri's lap was really good. If not for that moment, he would have been in the 119s. I mean, it was already a track record. But Russell, what a great job from him to deliver another sensational lap, really, because Mercedes looked like they were a little bit out of it, to be honest. It looked like it was going to be the McLarens versus Max. But Max is out of the picture, only 6th in the ends, Sainz in 8th, Leclerc in 9th, Albon in 10th, Russell separating the two McLarens at the front, then Fernando Alonso in 4th, then the two Red Bulls. So, you know, what a result for Yuki, but not so much for Max, right? Down in P6, I don't expect that to continue tomorrow. Yuki is not going to get in his way, and probably neither is Alonso, let's be honest. So I'd expect Max to get to 4th, but overtaking around here is going to be a challenge. The dirtier is a serious problem. So, qualifying is key, and, well, it was Oscar Piastri who took advantage of that opportunity today. So, big result. There was also some other drama on the reaction, right? So, Piastri takes pole. Norris doesn't get a lap in, right? So, he makes a mistake towards the end of his first lap. Then his second lap is just compromised by Alex Albon being in front. And it didn't feel like, to many, that the McLaren mechanics were maybe celebrating as much as they should have done or would have done if Lando Norris was the one to be on pole position. I don't know what you guys think about that, but it was certainly a talking point. Charles Leclerc as well was furious at somebody that impeded him. That was his opinion. I think this might have been Sainz, which is probably not a massive surprise to many of us. Max had a few words to say as well and says, with this balance, the setup clearly didn't work. Tomorrow's sprint is not going to be much fun. It's going to be more of a matter of survival. So, yes, let's see how Max gets on tomorrow. Again, he probably did have a bit of damage there, which meant that it's likely to be better tomorrow. But he says it's about surviving, changing the setup, and then, of course, trying to win on Sunday to keep the championship dream alive. But very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.